Mm-hmm.
Red leather, yellow leather. Red leather, yellow leather.
I've been talking all day. I don't got to do that.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
It doesn't seem like a very good business strategy.
It's not.
I
Trust
mean,
me, I've tried.
Get rich quick.
Unless you're there first and you scoop up all the other seashells.
And then there's none left?
There's none left.
Except for the broken ones?
All of them.
Oh.
You monetize the broken ones too.
I'll make them into like a mosaic art.
No, literally just have like a bucket and be like, scoop for $10.
I suppose.
Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And this week we're discussing part 2 of chapter 16. This is, what's the chapter name? It's like New Roles, I think. New Roles. Pretty sure. I'm not flipping back in my ebook.
There's so many pages. Oh, here we go. New roles. You're correct.
All right. We left off, I'll say that. We left off with Wintrow climbing down the riggings, and we paused there. And we are moving over to Althea now. And she has been on the Reaper with Brashen, that slaughter ship, and they were heading towards the Barrens, which is the destination island where a lot of the sea bears go on shore during their mating season. And a lot of ships, honestly, it said, just go there and slaughter the animals for their meat, their fat, their skins, and bring it back.
Right. It's very lucrative
Mm-hmm.
if you can survive the trip.
Right. One of the most lucrative trips of a slaughter ship's run.
Right.
So they made it through all of those storms and have their first sighting of the Barrens, which is, well, they are a flat island that's barely anything. It's some beach and then some scrub brush on the inland. Not much going on there in terms of geography, just a place where the sea bears go habitually. And they come up on the islands, and the best spot is already taken by another ship. So their captain, of course, is kind of cursing out and being angry and stomping around. But everyone knows that the profit all comes from the island itself, with the animals there and harvesting those. So there is no more violence between crews, even though it's kind of implied that there was violence in the past, fights over the best spots, that sort of thing.
Right.
Because it's good everywhere on these islands.
Yeah. And there's a really interesting comment made by Althea about the sea bears. She says, why the sea bears chose to haul out there to fight and mate and raise their young, she had no idea, especially as each year at this time, the slaughter boats came to drive and kill hundreds of their kind. She squinted her eyes against the flying salt spray and wondered what kind of deadly instinct brought them back here every year despite the memories of blood and death. And I thought that was really interesting of a descriptor because it made me think about the old traders and their family, that they come back. The live ship people come back to Bingtown every year, even though they could sail away and be free.
That's
and
true.
It takes their children every year, there's a price to pay. And so I thought it was really interesting to see Althea so confused at the idea of these animals staying in a place that's so dangerous, and yet her own family does the exact same thing.
True. Good connection. So the hunters and the skinners and everything like that have their chance to shine now. They're kind of rousing from their idleness on board, as the members of the sailors are in relative leisure here, relative free time. And I say relative because there's always tasks to be done. But the hunters at least have to do something now. And Althea finds out or relates to us that they had almost killed one of their member in their idleness, at least beaten him up bad enough where he couldn't do anything because they accused him of cheating at cards or dice or whatever gambling thing that they were doing. So they are one down, and she thought that it wouldn't affect them that much, but it turns out she does have to help them.
Right. It does affect her. And it is interesting because she talks about how the men that are part of this hunter party are just very loud and crass and not fun to be around. She'd prefer to not have to be around them at all, but she's a ship's boy, so sometimes she has to bring them things. So that's how she knows them before this. And now she is stuck being their ship boy, doing all the little tasks that nobody else really wants to.
Yep. So she is called out to join them and just give them whatever help they might need. And she, of course, has to just jump to her feet, say, yes, sir, even though she would rather be doing other stuff, like she was in the middle of mending her pants, that sort of thing. Has to drop it all, gets back up, heads out on board and onto the small rowboats that they're sending out, and realizes that Brashen is going to be in charge of the sailors on the shore. And she resolved to give him no reason to notice her. She'd be working with the hunters and skinners anyway. There was no need for their paths to cross. For an instant, she wondered just what her task would be and then shrugged it off as useless curiosity. They'd tell her soon enough. So she is sticking to her guns of just kind of, he'll stay in his lane, I'll stay in mine. Avoid each other, it's fine.
Right. In her mind, Brashen has nothing to do with her, and she has nothing to do with Brashen. It's just unfortunate luck that they're on the same ship. Whereas we know that Brashen is keeping a full eye on Althea, and he is very aware of what she's doing at all times.
Or trying to be.
As much as he can be without drawing attention to the fact that he is giving her special treatment.
I don't think he's giving her special treatment at all. He's giving Reller special treatment to keep an eye on her.
Right.
And he's telling Reller to like make sure she doesn't mess up or anything. So technically Reller is doing the special treatment.
Okay, fair enough.
So they go onto the rocky beaches. The adult males had already left, meaning the sea bears, beginning the migration back to wherever these creatures wintered. And on the sandy inland plains, Althea knew they would find the younger females in this year's crop of offspring. They would have lingered there, feeding off the late runs of fish and gathering fat and strength before they began their long journeys. So they are going to head inland a bit. They kind of dock, they bring the boats to shore, the sailors get off, and they have their own tasks to help with the packing of all of the animal parts that they're going to be harvesting. But the hunters and the skinners have to head inland to start that. And Althea is with them, carrying all of the stuff that she can, because they don't want to carry it all, and she's just the extra person, basically.
Right. They're giving her any duty they don't want to perform themselves.
Mm-hmm. And she's kind of confused because they're just strolling along, talking, laughing, and she figured this was going to be kind of, a hunt, a stalk, some sort of silence required, but they come over a rise, and there's just a bunch of sea bears laying there, and they kind of look up at them, but they ignore the humans, and they don't care. And then it's just a slaughter yard. They unload the arrows and the quivers, pass them out, and then the hunters just choose their targets and start. The hunters were businesslike about their killing. As soon as the final arrows were expended, they moved down to reclaim them from the dead beasts, while the skinners came behind them like gore crows to a battle scene. The bulk of the live animals had moved off in annoyance from the struggles and bellows of those struck and dying. They still seemed to feel no panic, only a distaste for the odd antics that had disturbed their rest. The leader of the hunters glanced at Althea in some annoyance. "See what's keeping them with the salt," he barked at her, as if she had known she would have this duty and had neglected it. She scrambled to this command, just as glad to leave the scene of slaughter. The skinners were already at work, stripping the hide from each beast, salvaging tongues, hearts, and livers before rolling the entrails out of the way and leaving the naked, fat and meat creatures on their own hides. The knowledgeable gulls were already coming to the feast. So this is what the sailors were doing on the beach. They were rolling off all of those casks of salt that we had described earlier, I think a couple chapters ago, and that's where they're going to pack all of the delicacies and the things that they're going to bring back to sell.
Right. It would have been last episode because
did we talk about the salt? Yeah. Okay.
Well, this is the first chapter where she's been on this ship. So.
Makes sense.
But yes, they're bringing a lot of salt. They have to be able to keep everything secure and not rotting by the time it gets to where they can sell it. And the faster they can get it in the salt, the more pristine it's going to be. So, of course, there's that frustration there. It's also really interesting to hear how these animals are not associating what's going on to their fellow beings as being hunted. They kind of are more annoyed than anything, but they're still around. So it's just really easy picking. And again, I don't know, maybe this is just me looking too far into it, but it is really reminiscent to me of the Big Town Traders, of like something coming in and hurting members of the group, and yet instead of recognizing that and fleeing or doing
We don't
something to
need to
fight back,
change.
no, we don't need to change, just keep doing it the way it's always been done. And so I just keep finding it really interesting how much this slaughter of the sea bears and their deathly island reminds me of Althea and the Big Town Traders.
Yeah.
But we are here, and I think it's just really hard. We have Althea struggling with, it's gross. This is a gross task. It's also really
distasteful.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's just so much death unnecessarily. And I don't think she talks about this, but a thought that I had is like, they're killing all of the females and the babies. So how are more going to ever come back if you just keep killing all of them? I don't know. I think it's such a weird thought to go through. And
I think she was mentioning that they had moved inland and stuff, but it doesn't ever specify specifically that this is the group of young females and they're young, right?
they were, yeah, you read it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. She is talking about the migration of like where they went and things like that, but I don't know if that's linked to this field specifically.
Okay, so we don't know for sure that it's the cubs and their mothers only being slaughtered here, but there's a potential that that's what's happening.
So like, yeah, I don't know. The text is there that it's like linked, but it just doesn't make sense to me with the care that Robin Hobb puts into things. Like,
it's not described that there's different sizes of animal being like drastically, like a baby versus a adult.
Yeah.
Being, and it doesn't talk about how like one's fur is more like
soft or something, whatever it is.
Or like more, what's it called? Not unique, valuable than the other, which I feel like baby animal fur is usually more valuable.
Right.
I don't know. So maybe it's not, maybe.
But like with the descriptions right there, you were kind of right in that like it's right next to each other. I don't know. Either way, it's some group of beasts, as Althea calls them.
Right. And she can't get over how kind of gross it is. Even after a few days of this slaughter happening, where now she is touching it because at some point they just have to start salting and putting away the animal parts that the skinners have gone through and done so that they can preserve everything faster. So she's just picking up body parts and animal fat. And even that doesn't really shield her from how gross. Just the more that she sees it, the longer it's going on, the more horrible it feels. She does describe that the method in which they're killing the animals is done so that they can preserve the meat and coat. And so it is not quick or painless. And that is just hard to watch over and over and over again. And it's just gotten to the point where she's had to just kind of stop thinking and she's just doing. She's just picking things up. She's doing it. And then by the time it gets to the point where somebody hands her a knife and tells her that she needs to skin now, she kind of is just doing whatever people are telling her. She's trying not to think about it.
And it's been a few days in between there.
Right.
It was the beginning of one of the seemingly endless bloody days that followed. To Althea fell the tasks that everyone else judged themselves too busy to do. So she was doing everything, like you said. And eventually there was a storm where they had to do everything very, very quickly in order to pack everything up so it didn't ruin. And that's when she was handed a knife and she had to start skinning.
I guess we did I did skip a little bit in there
Yeah.
because it talks about in between how they camp by Dragon Rock,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is important to talk about.
I did want to mention this as well.
Yes. So they built a rough camp on the island on the same site as last year's camp, in the lee of a rock formation known as the Dragon. Their tent was little more than canvas stretched to break the wind and fires for warmth and cooking, but at least it was a shelter.
She talks a little bit about how the smells weren't great, but it was nice to have a break from the close smells of the ship. So, like, man, that ship must not smell good.
Right. Yeah, they all smell like blood and guts right now, and that's better than being on.
Well, at least a change.
Right, I suppose. Well, I guess when you're in close confines with a bunch of people and hygiene is questionable,
Right.
I'm sure, and you're doing heavy labor, it's probably disgusting smelling.
But she was glad of her change in status as well, a bit. She kind of talks about how working with the hunters and skinners is nice, it's a good change of pace. And she's not envying anybody who has to do the hard work of rolling the salt kegs over there, getting them packed, and then rolling them and loading them back. So she's kind of glad for her change in job right now. Her own tasks continued to evolve as the hunters and skinners thought of them. She honed knives, retrieved arrows, salted and packed hearts and tongues, spread hides and salted hides, and shook hides and rolled hides and tied hides. She coated slabs of meat with salt and layered it into casks. And the weather was great until it started raining that one day.
Right. I also do want to say that I don't understand the concept. My brain cannot wrap around the concept of having a cask of salt and adding things to that. Like, does that mean that it's only half filled with salt so they have room to put stuff throughout?
Possibly.
Or is it mostly filled with salt? Like, the whole time I'm reading this, like, I know I'm supposed to be focusing on the deeper meanings and like the good juicy bits, but part of me was just like, but then how would you get the salt out to put things in without ruining or like dumping it on the ground? And then you can't use it if it's on the ground. And then, so I spent a very large portion of time trying to figure out how the salt bins work.
I would assume that they're mostly filled with salt, so there's a little bit of room, but also it talks about how they have to pack the hides with salt. So I'm assuming they're scooping it out and putting it on product.
Right.
To preserve it specifically and then putting the product in the empty-ish barrels.
So probably not FDA standards.
Well, no. None of them are washing their hands.
Ew, gross. Well, anyway, she has been doing this, and that's when she's handed the knife.
Mm-hmm. She had seen it done often enough now that she had lost most of her squeamishness. Still, a moment's disgust uncoiled inside her as she peeled the soft hide back from the thick layer of fat. And she's talking about like steeling herself and slicing through and holding the hide a couple times and just not doing well. But when she relaxed and did not think about what she was doing so much as how to do it well, the next hide came free as simply as if she were peeling a Jamalian orange. It was, she realized, simply a matter of thinking how an animal was made, where hide would be thick or thin, fat present or absent. By her fourth animal, she realized it was not only easy for her, but that she was good at it. She moved swiftly from carcass to carcass, suddenly uncaring of the blood and the smell. The long slice to open the beast, the swift skinning, followed by a quick disemboweling, and talks about how she's good at this, and she moves quickly. And at some point she lifted her head to peer around through the driving sleet. The cold rain pounded her back and dripped into her eyes, but until that moment of respite, she had been almost unaware of it. Behind her, she realized, were no less than 3 teams of butchers trying to keep up with her. She had left behind her a wide trail of stripped carcasses. In the distance, one of the hunters appeared to be speaking to the maid about something. He made an offhand gesture towards her, and she suddenly knew with certainty that she was the topic of their conversation. She once more bent her head to her work, her hands flying as she blinked away the cold rain that ran into her eyes and dripped from her nose. A small fire of pride began to burn within her. It was dirty, disgusting work, carried out on a scale that was beyond greed. But she was good at it. And it had been so long since she had been able to claim that for herself, her hunger for it shocked her. So this is some of that lost pride that really took a hit when she signed on to be a sailor on the Reaper.
Right.
The pride that Kyle dug at, and she kind of saying like, "Oh, Kyle's right. I'm not good for anything."
Right. And then here she has this thing where she's actually really good at it. And I think that's really big for her. It also probably feels good that she gets to be good at this thing and it's not going to be labeled for a girl at the
Right.
end.
Right.
That people will just say you're good at that. I'm sure she a little bit knows that she has found something once again where people are proud of her for doing that and think that she's good at something. And I think that's really important to Althea. I think that's kind of how she works. She needs the positive reinforcement, so to speak, to keep going.
Sense of accomplishment.
Yes, I think her father had it right in that her punishments can't be heavy handed because that just defeats the purpose of her learning something. And so seeing that in practice where she's had sort of a heavy-handed punishment of not being appreciated basically over and over again. And here she finally gets to see some recognition. Of course, she's going to be excited and she's going to work harder and do it because I don't know, it feels really good to be good at something and to be recognized for being good at something, especially when you've had a really long go of not being recognized.
True. And when she is finally done with her task, she kind of lifts her head up, notices people are around her moving, packing things. And one of the men rights one of the casks that's right there and meets her eyes, and it is Brashen. She grinned at him. Pretty good, eh? He wiped rain from his own face and then observed quietly. Were I you, I'd do as little as possible to call attention to myself. Your disguise won't withstand a close scrutiny. His rebuke irritated her. Maybe if I get good enough at this, I won't need to be disguised anymore. The look that passed over his face was both incredulous and horrified. He stove in the end of the salt cask and then gestured at her as if he were bidding her to get to work salting hides. But what he said was, Did these two-legged animals you crew with suspect for one moment that you were a woman? They'd use you, one and all, with less concern than they give to this slaughter. Valuable as you might be to them as a skinner, they'd see no reason why they couldn't use you as a whore as well. And they would see it that by your being here you had expected and consented to such use. Something in his low, earnest voice chilled her beyond the rain's touch. There was such certainty in his tone, she could not imagine arguing with it. Instead, she hurried off to meet the man with the hogshead, bearing with her the tongue and heart from her final beast. She continued with this task, keeping her head low as if to keep rain from her eyes, and trying to think of nothing. Nothing. If she had stopped to think about how easy that had become lately, it might have frightened her.
So I think this is a really sad interaction because for one moment, Althea forgot about the position she was in. And that's kind of taken away from her by Brashen. He doesn't even say good job. He's not recognizing
Right.
that she did something well, which, to be fair, he hasn't done for anything that she does. He's not really that kind of person. But
we know in his head he's like, she's pretty good at this.
yeah, I'm sure in his brain he's like, wow, this is really good. And I don't know, it's so sad that he has to be so harsh with the reality, quote unquote, that she's living in and how she absolutely cannot tell them that she's a woman. And it's hard because I don't know if he's right or not. There's pretty good indicators that he probably is. But also, it's like, is he right? Or is he just saying that because that's worst case scenario? And I mean, to be fair, that being worst case scenario, you wouldn't want to just reveal yourself willy-nilly.
Don't want to attempt that.
No, and I think that's his purpose, is reminding her not to be too reckless of like, yeah, sure, you're good at something, but
don't stand out too much.
Right. And his idea that her costume, I guess, her disguise won't hold up to scrutiny is kind of dumb because he took weeks to notice it was her, and the only reason he knows she's a woman is because he knew her before. I don't think anybody else would notice. Even standing close, obviously standing close, because people do stand close to her and sleep in the same room as her and they don't know. I think it's more just Brashen's anxieties coming to a head of, oh no, what happens if they find out? And I kind of think we see a little bit of the chicken side of Brashen, because we have Brashen kind of admitting that he wouldn't stick up for her, that that's just what would happen to her, and she'd have to be okay with that.
In his worst case scenario with that happening, he would probably die if he did stick up for her.
Yeah,
right?
I
Because
suppose
in his worst case, like
people are upset that he's trying to take her for himself in their minds, even though
either that, or even if he wasn't associated and he just tried to like, hey, don't do that. He'd be like, it's the people who would be fine with using somebody else and raping them. They probably wouldn't have a care if they killed you.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah. So like I get why he wouldn't want to stand up, and that's like why he's saying like this will just happen to you. But it is a little sad also, just like that's just how it is. Like I don't know. It's bad. Not a great environment. I would say toxic work culture.
That's fair.
But poor Althea, the wind has been taken out of her sails because she is no longer proud. She's just trying to get through the rest of the day now.
Right. Get back to camp, and with the storm, the lighting and the lightning kind of flashes at the rock formation that they're camping next to, and this is the first time she can see it in awful detail. She had not seen it before because she had not expected it to be sprawled on its back, four legs clutching at its black chest, outflung wings submerged in earth, the contortions of its immense body adumbrated in an agonized death. Adumbrated?
Adumbrated? I don't know.
Adumbrated in agonized death. Robin Hobb using those words, I don't know. Althea halted on the slight rise that offered her this view and stared in horror. Who would carve such a thing, and why on earth did they camp in its lee? She kind of lets out a breath, and Reller is next to her saying, bit unnerving the first time you'd catch it, eh? She says, bit, but for all that, it's just a rock. And he lowers his voice saying, you're so sure of that? You ought to climb up on its chest sometime and take a look. That part there, that looks like four legs? They clutch at the stump of an arrow shaft, or what's left of one. No, boy, that's the for-real carcass of a live dragon, brought down when the world was younger than an egg, rotting slow ever since. And Althea, of course, like no such thing as dragons, and he relates something that he saw off the coast of the Six Duchies a few years back. I saw dragons, and not just one or two, whole phalanx of them flying like geese in every bright color and shape you can name, and not just one, but once, but twice. There's some as say they brought the serpents, but that ain't true. I'd seen serpents years before that, way down south. Of course, nowadays we see a lot more of them, so folk believe in them. But when you've sailed as long as I and been as far as I, you'll learn that there's a lot of things that are real, but only a few folk have seen them. And she, of course, is again like, yeah, stop pulling my leg. And he's actually kind of affronted because genuinely he did see them. And she's like, oh, I got to be a little bit more gullible. I'm supposed to be a 14-year-old Chips boy. And she says, well, the next time if he trotted out a sea tail, she'd be more receptive and make it out to him. After all, he was as close as she had to a friend aboard the Reaper. So we have word from somebody who has actually seen the dragons that there's an arrow sticking out of this rock formation. And it's called the dragon because it is a dragon carcass.
Yeah. Whether or not it's an actual dragon carcass is it's probably not. It's probably more of a stone dragon, I would say.
Maybe.
You think it's a real dragon?
You think a stone dragon would be brought down by an arrow?
If it's a wizard wood arrow.
Yeah. How many wizard wood arrows are there?
I suppose back in the day.
Back in the day,
well,
they
you don't
didn't
know,
have
maybe
wizard wood.
You don't know that. There could be people who were anti-dragon in general.
That's fair.
But you think one arrow is going to take down a dragon?
No, but the one that, gets it. Maybe a big like spear or something. I don't know.
But it isn't a big spear, it's an arrow.
Right.
So, I don't know. I always thought it was just a stone dragon. I didn't think it was a real carcass.
I think it's kind of like a calcified or, petrified real dragon carcass. I like to think so, at least.
I guess Icefire is I guess that's an ice, though. But his body is completely fine. It's
Yeah.
not gone away. So maybe,
There's enough salt there.
yeah. I don't know. It's really hard to tell what happens to dragons when they die because it feels like mostly they get eaten for their memories. So why would
Right.
this dragon have been left behind? Unless it was one of the last.
Unless it was hunted by Clarice.
Yeah, but why wouldn't they just left it though? They didn't want to use the
That is
blood,
true. Unless they got it and it flew away and it finally crashed somewhere.
I suppose.
You know, we can come up with a billion reasons why it could be
Fair.
a real or fake, but I like to believe that it's a real carcass.
Okay. I don't, but
That's fine.
I'll allow you to continue thinking that way.
Well, that's it for Althea this chapter. Kind of wrap up her tale. She's good at something, finally change of pace, and then wind taken out of her sails with that. And still, again, we are reminded that she is in a dangerous position. And I don't think there is an Althea section that we are not reminded that eventually.
Right. Yeah. Of how, like, sure, something is not that bad until, oh, yeah, it's really bad. It is also interesting, though, that she doesn't believe that dragons actually help the six duchies. Because you think she would have heard about it before now.
Yeah, or that dragons are real in general.
Right. Like, nobody else saw it and told. But I guess if you haven't seen them in your location, it could just be an old wives' tale. Like, sure, yeah, it was definitely dragons in the sky that came to help. And
Dragons that like make you kind of forget things that they fly overhead.
yeah, true. So I guess, yeah, the tales would be kind of old wives' tales.
Yeah. We join back in with Wintrow aboard the Vivacia, again with a little bit of a time skip here. They're making their fourth port. Remember at the beginning of this journey, I believe there were 7 stops along the way. And this is the 4th one. We've kind of skipped over all of Chalced here. And we are with Wintrow, leaning on the railing beside Vivacia, staring at the white-spired town snugged in the crook of the tiny harbor. He had been silent, as he often was, but lately the silence had been more companionable than miserable. She blessed Mild with all her heart. Since he had extended his friendship to Wintrow, the boy had begun to thrive. Wintrow, if not cheerful, was at least gaining a little bit of the cockiness that was expected of the ship's boy. When that post had been Mild's, he had been daring and lively, into mischief when he was not being the ship's jester for anyone who had a spare moment to share with him. When Mild had acquired the status of a hand, he had settled into a more sober attitude toward his work, as was right. But Wintrow had suffered badly in comparison. It had showed all too plainly that his heart was not in his work. He had ignored or misunderstood the sailor's attempts to jest with him, and his doldrum spirits had not been conducive to anyone wishing to spend time with him. Now that he was beginning to smile, if only occasionally, and to good-naturedly rebut some of the sailor's jests, he was beginning to be accepted. And they were more prone to giving a word of advice or a word of warning that prevented him from making mistakes that multiplied his workload. So he was getting a little bit easier of a time. It's kind of what we mentioned at the end of, or in last episode as well, that with Mild extending his friendship out to Wintrow, it really, really helps him be more accepted into the crew. He can get an in even when he's not socially aware of some of the jokes or the jests or anything. Mild kind of gives him that little window of like, they're just playing with you, bud.
Right. And I think we didn't give a Mild enough credit last time to be patient like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
like the second or third time he's reached out.
Yeah. He continues to reach out to Wintrow to try to build a friendship. And I don't know. I feel like it's really sweet that he does that. I mean, he's only 15, so he's only 2 years older than Wintrow. And yet he still is like, you know what? I'm going to help this kid out. Like, obviously he doesn't know what's going on. And I just think that's really sweet for a 15-year-old boy of all things to do, to like be kind in this situation and kind of help Wintrow and be like, hey, like, here's what you're missing. And then Wintrow can say, oh, okay. And it helps Wintrow to better figure out the rules, so to speak, because it feels like Wintrow needs that set of rules to do things. He needs to understand where people are coming from so that he knows what their rules are so that he can participate with them in a way that makes sense to him, which is totally fair. That's how he sees the world. And it's really nice that Mild helped with that.
Yeah.
Saw that and helped instead of just made fun.
And now an occasional word of praise or camaraderie was beginning to waken in Wintrow a sense of being part of the crew, and some now perceived that his gentle nature and thoughtful ways were not a weakness. Vivacia was beginning to have hopes for him. So she was feeling a bit better about Wintrow's prospects as a sailor as well.
Right.
Even though he is still a bit distrustful of her, she is feeling that connection with him deeper now, looking back at him, seeing a young Ephron Vestrit in his features, asking him to put his hand in hers, and she shares a memory from Ephron's eyes with Wintrow at this very port town. Ephron loved to go throughout this city and walk through it and see the natural beauty and the carvings and the beautiful art that this city has produced. And Vivacia is reliving this memory on Claw Island here and giving it to Wintrow as well, showing exactly, what architecture there was, how many like farms he walked past and what merchants he talked to and everything like that. All of his experiences basically are now Wintrow's memories as well. Because this is how Althea felt at the end of it, was those are pretty much my memories now too.
Right.
So there's an intense link and sharing with this particular location. And Wintrow is thinking like his grandfather had always allowed himself time to stroll through the city's marble heart and look up at the carved faces of heroes, the friezes of legends, and the arches on which plants both live and carved, climbed, and coiled. And you brought it here, much of the marble facing, without you and him. Oh, I see. It is almost like my windows. Light shines through them to illuminate the labor of my hands. Through your work, Sa's light shines in this beauty. So Wintrow is kind of seeing more of Sa's joy and Sa's way of introducing beauty through Vivacia here, saying that Ephron and Vivacia brought a lot of the materials that the city used to build this city and brought beauty to the world that way. So he's kind of trying to find his own mental and logical leaps to connect Vivacia to Sa's goodness.
Right. I think it's really interesting too to learn this little tidbit about Ephron. It's a side of him that we haven't gotten to see yet, that he seems to enjoy the arts for art's sake.
We do hear a little bit from Ronica's point of view, saying like he always talked about that he wanted me to walk through the cities of the beautiful things that
Right.
no one's ever seen, stuff like that. But yeah, this is very specific. I like to look at beautiful carved things.
Right. And I think that does lend itself to showing more likeness between Wintrow and Ephron, that there is this sense of you need to stop and smell the roses. That like that's what life is about. It's
Right.
not just hustle and bustle and work. There's also needs to be this time of reflection, of beauty.
And so, with the words that Wintrow was speaking out loud that I read, Vivacia can feel a moving toward unity that he seemed to value above all else was that what he appreciated here. He did not see the elaborately carved facades of the buildings as works of art to enjoy. Instead, they were an expression of something she could not grasp, a coming together of ship and merchant and trading folk that had resulted in not just physical beauty, but Arcphoria Sa. She did not know the word. She could only reach after the concept. Joy embodied, the best of men and nature coming together in a permanent expression, justification of all Sa had bequeathed so lavishly upon the world. She felt a soaring euphoria in him she had never experienced in any of his other kin, and suddenly recognized that this was what he had missed so hungrily. The priests had taught him to see the world with these eyes, had gently awakened in him a hunger for unadulterated beauty and goodness. He believed his destiny was to pursue goodness, to find and exalt in it in all of its forms, to believe in goodness. She had sought to share and teach. Instead, she had been given and taught. She surprised herself by drawing back from him, breaking the fullness of the contact. This was a thing she needed to consider, and perhaps she needed to be alone to consider it fully. And in that thought, she recognized yet again the full impact Wintrow was having on her. So this is, we can see the depth and the importance of the bond between the two. Wintrow is emotionally mature, which is a great thing for a young ship.
Right.
But he is young himself, so there are issues there. But it is wonderful that the ship can also learn because she is incredibly young too, even though she has the wealth of knowledge of generations and wants to teach Wintrow about his ancestors and things that she knows that he is in the world that they're in right now. She still has a ton to learn as well. And that's the give and take there of that bond.
Right. And I think this first connection with Wintrow will really temper her for years to come, and that she'll be able to think about Saw and Saw's beauty. She'll probably be the first religious ship. Like,
Not after sailing with Kenneth, probably.
fair. But I think it's just really interesting to see that, like you said, the growth and the bond between them widening in a way that affects Vivacia so deeply. I don't think Wintrow is as affected by this bond. Obviously, he gets something out of it and there's some sort of weird connection there.
Right.
He's drawn to her and he does appreciate her company, but I don't feel like she's teaching him in the way that he is teaching her, if that makes sense.
I don't think he's fully open to it yet. Like,
Fair,
she
yeah.
kind of points out he still has some of a wariness
Right,
of
yeah.
whether she is good or evil in Saw's eyes. But there is a physical, sharing of the memories, which is teaching him a bit. But yeah, I agree with you that I don't think it's as on a deep of level as what Wintrow is showing Vivacia at the moment.
Right. And I guess, I mean, Wintrow isn't an undying being who will see generations of Vivacia to come. So probably the scale of which she can touch his life and change him is a lot different because it's not something that is planting a seed to grow for later. It's kind of just, if it doesn't happen now, it probably won't happen in his lifetime sort of deal. Unless he were to stay on her forever, which I don't think he does. Well, they stay together, I guess.
Yeah, he does sail her.
Yeah.
Until I think she turns into dragons. Or does she not choose to?
I don't remember.
I can't remember. I think she chooses not to immediately, but might later or something like that in the last book.
I don't really remember.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
But either way, we have this time of introspection for Vivacia, who is normally very outgoing and pushing towards that connection with Wintrow. So this is the first time she's really drawn away from that on her own terms of, you know what, I think I want to think about this alone.
Coming into herself as an individual a little bit more, which is nice. But Wintrow, on the other hand, is also, as we've been saying, being accepted as a crew member, and he is given shore time. And he knows this is not from his father nor from Torg, so this is as we said we would keep an eye out for, one of the good deeds that Gantry does, the first mate.
Right.
And it puzzled Wintrow. He knew that the mate had full charge of all the men on board the ship, and that only the captain's word was higher, yet he did not think Gantry had even been fully cognizant of his existence. The man had scarcely spoken to him directly at all in the time he had been aboard. Yet his name was called out for the first group of men allowed time ashore, and he found his heart soaring with anticipation. He was not allowed out in Chelsea, and this is going to be his first time off the ship, basically, since Bingtown. But he had moments of indecision about what clothes to wear, because he basically has his shore clothes and his priest robe.
Right. And it's not just regular shore clothes. It's a sailor's typical shore clothes.
Right.
Which marks you as a sailor. So it's a bright colored striped shirt and, normal tight breeches.
Yeah. Coarse black trousers as cheaply made as his deck clothes. And they did not even fit him well because Torg didn't really care about sizes.
Right. So it is talked about how Torg was given money by Wintrow's father because Kyle didn't trust Wintrow to go shopping off of the boat. So Torg was put in charge, and Wintrow guesses that based off of the horrible cut of the clothing and also the cheaply made aspect of it, that Torg probably pocketed a lot of the money just for his own use. And now he's left with some hard choices. But he decides ultimately he can't wear his priest robes out. Number one, because the bottom is super frayed and it's been patched over and over again. But number two, he doesn't think it would be right to go into a town dressed as a priest of Saw, because then people would be expecting him to be a priest and they would be treating him like a priest. And that's not what he was there for. So he thought it would be very dishonest.
And he would lose what ground he had gained with his fellows if he chose the robe over the sailor's outfit.
Right.
And as he's dressing in the sailor's outfit, he's telling himself that it was not a denial of his priesthood, but indeed a practical choice, and goes into the explanation, or is convincing himself, like what you said, where it would be dishonest to go amongst them as a priest because he came as a sailor. So resolutely, he set aside the niggling discomfort that perhaps he was making too many compromises lately, that perhaps his morality was becoming too flexible. He hurried to join those going ashore. So this is a continuing strand throughout Wintrow's whole plot line through this trilogy is, where does my line lie? What is my path? Am I a sailor? Am I a priest? Does one encroach on the other? Can they live in harmony? And a lot of this early book is talking about giving up some sort of ground or flexing his morality to fit his life around a sailor, and, you know, having mental calculations to explain away why it's not
Right.
a
And
difference.
yeah, it definitely feels reminiscent of what Althea is going through, and that kind of, and that there's a sense of, I'm not doing well, and here's this thing that I can do well, and so I want to ride that high. And then as soon as I am done feeling good about that, because I have, in Wintrow's case, fit in, or in Althea's case, exceeded at someone's expectations, then the realization comes that the cost of that was to lose a little bit of yourself that you were protecting.
Right.
And so for Wintrow, that cost is his priesthood, the closeness to Saw, this straying away from what a priest should be. And I feel bad for him, because he's a teenage boy, and he just
he's
wants to be
young.
accepted. And I think that's something everybody wants. You want to be part of a group. And so just to have these little moments of, well, I know it's probably not what I'm supposed to do as a priest, but in this moment I'm not. And it's bad for the team. And I just feel so sorry for him.
There's 5 of them going ashore in this group, including Wintrow and Mild, and one of them was Comfrey. Wintrow found that he could neither keep his eyes off the man nor meet his gaze squarely. There he sat, the man who had perpetrated the coffee cup obscenity on his father, and Wintrow could not decide whether to be horrified by him or amused.
Right.
It's really funny. They have some jests, good-natured jests, and Wintrow, despite his embarrassment, found himself grinning as the other men laughed, and he suddenly grasped the good nature behind a great deal of the teasing. So he's getting these realizations of, they're not just making fun of me, they're not trying to be mean. He's getting the social part of it a bit.
Right. Of like, even if it like is kind of mean, like the comment specifically was about how the women in town will probably
Tickle his fancy,
and they'll sleep with him for half price because he's so tiny.
Yeah.
Like, it's a joke, but it's not a nice joke. It isn't particularly all that funny to me personally, but I can see how Wintrow's like, oh, this isn't him making fun of me as a person. This is just a joke at my expense, but to make everybody laugh. It's kind of, it is making fun of him, but it's supposed to be in a friendly way.
That's a lot of friendships, in my opinion.
I suppose. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. I don't know. I'm protective of Wintrow. I don't want him to be made fun of. It's not nice.
He's a dopey little priest boy. So their liberty would only last until sundown, he says. And 2 of the men were already complaining that the best of the wine and women were not to be found on the streets until after that. And Comfrey's like, oh, don't you believe them? There's plenty to be had at any hour here. Those 2 just prefer the darkness for their pleasures. With faces like those, they need a bit of shadow even to persuade a whore to take them on. So Comfrey is kind of described and listed out as a funny guy. He's
Right.
easygoing. He's a nice guy to just kind of get along with, and he'll make jokes all the time. And Wintrow has to say that he's going to run some errands. He's going to excuse himself from the group. He's like, I want to see the carvings on the Adishi Hall and the friezes on the Heroes Wall. All the men looked at him curiously, but only Mild asked, How do you know about that stuff? You been to Crest before? He shook his head. No, but the ship has. Vivacia told me about them, and that my grandfather had found them beautiful. I thought I'd go see for myself. And everyone kind of falls silent. And there's even a tiny gesture with a little left finger that might have been an invocation of Sa's protection against evil magic. Again, Mild was the one to speak. Does the ship really know everything that Captain Vestrit knew? Wintrow shrugs. I don't know. I only know what she chooses to share with me is very vivid, almost as if it became my memory. He halted, suddenly uncomfortable. He found that he did not want to speak about it at all. It was private, he discovered, that link between himself and the Vivacia. No, more than private, an intimacy. The silence became uncomfortable again, but this time Comfrey rescued them. Well, fellows, I don't know about you, but I don't get to the beach time all that often. I'm for town and a certain street where both the flowers and the women bloom sweet. He glanced at Mile. See that both you and Wintrow are back on the boat on time. I don't want to have to come looking for you. And Mild, of course, is protesting. I'm not going to go with Wintrow, blah, blah, blah. And Wintrow's like, no, he doesn't have to come with me. I can go there myself.
Right. I do want to pause to say that there is that moment where he's talking about what the relationship he has with Vivacia is. There's these people who don't really know how it works. They've worked on live ships their whole lives and yet still don't really know. And he finds himself being very old tradery, in my opinion, by hoarding that secret to himself. He kind of explains and then realizes, yeah, I don't think I'm giving anything else.
That's true.
And so the secret lives on.
It is a private thing, too. I mean, it's more than just a friendship, right?
Right. And it's more than just sharing of a memory. Like there's a sharing of minds as well. And that is hard to explain and also would be a little bit embarrassing. Sure. But there is this moment, like you said. So Mild is then asked to go with him. And Wintrow says, I'm not going to run away. I promise.
And they're all surprised and like, of course you're not.
Yeah, we didn't think you were. Like, actually, there's nowhere for you to go, even if you wanted to. It's an island.
And Comfrey says, and the Camarans aren't exactly friendly to strangers. We weren't worrying about you running off, Wintrow. Crest can be dangerous for a sailor out and about on his lonesome. Not just a ship's boy, but any sailor. You ought to go with him, Mild. How long can it take for him to look at a wall anyway? Mild was extremely unhappy. It's not necessarily an order, but, it's if he were to suggest and Wintrow got into some kind of trouble, it'd be on Mild.
Right.
And Wintrow insists that he'll be fine. And I'll meet you back over here. It's going to be fine.
He'll be back before sundown.
Yep.
It's okay. And they kind of take it. They say, okay. And Wintrow explains that the reason that it's taken as okay is because they gave him opportunity and now it's not their fault if something happens. That it was Wintrow's stupidity that will get him hurt, if anything. And Wintrow doesn't think he's in danger.
No, he watches them walk off, laugh. He feels a pang of longing to go with them, but at the same time, he really, really wants to go see all of these things that he saw in his grandfather's memories.
Right.
He says he watches Mild, kind of bouncing along the heels of this group, and he recognizes that Mild had just kind of been accepted into this group and was trying to fit in, and this might be the first time he's getting an invite to go along with the street and everything like that. And Wintrow says, it didn't bother me, Not really, he told himself. He knew enough of men's ways to realize that it was natural for him to want to be part of the group, to do whatever he must do to belong. And he told himself sternly, he knew enough of Sa's ways to know that there were times when a man had to set himself apart from the group for his own good, which is a very specific paragraph I highlighted because that comes up later.
Right.
To his detriment, but it was a good decision overall.
Right.
Says bad enough, really, that he had not so much as muttered a single word against their afternoon's plans for whoring and drunkenness. He tried to find reasons for that, but knew they were only excuses and set the whole question aside in his mind. He had done what he'd done, and tonight he would meditate on it and try to find perspective. So again, in his mind, he's like, but I'm a priest. I can't let them go off without saying anything.
Right. It is really interesting to have this struggle for him where he's like finding a way to fit in with them, but also still having the lessons of Saw be drilled into him. And so he feels as though it's not good. At least this time he didn't say that he thought it was a bad idea. I feel like first night on the boat, Wintrow would have lectured them all about Saw. But, he's building that camaraderie. Like he said, it's all just kind of excuses to be part of the group, and he'll meditate on it later.
Yeah, yeah. And as Wintrow walks through the city, he mentions that he has Ephron's memories to guide him. And it's almost like Ephron walking next to him. And there's warnings sticking out that not everyone is friendly, but he kind of ignores them and puts them down to like, this man is affronted that I'm smiling at him because I recognize him from my grandfather's memories and he doesn't know who I am. But I'm pretty sure it's because he's in a sailor's outfit and staring at the shopkeep.
Right.
There's just some sorts of warnings and disconnects through Wintrow's memories and what he expects and what's actually happening.
Right. And I think part of that is because he was in Ephron Vestrit's eyes.
Yeah.
So the people of this town know Ephron, and they know who he is. They know he's not going to cause trouble. So of course they're going to treat him with kindness.
Well, and he was the captain. So he had, and Althea described that he had very nice captain's like outfit suit made up.
Yes. That he
looked like a well-to-do man.
Right. He doesn't look like a vagabond. So we have Althea's dad, who also was older, so I assume that would also give a little bit of respect to the people of the town, like giving him respect. And that's the memories that Wintrow is walking through. So he thinks, of course it's safe because it was safe for his grandfather. I think that's an even bigger disadvantage for him. Right. And probably a big reason why he doesn't take the warning seriously from the sailors.
Yeah. So he continues walking past that shopkeep, getting a little affronted look. He's like, oh, I was too familiar with my smile. And eventually makes his way to a well square and stops to stare in awe. It is a beautiful fountain. And he says, each basin had been fancifully decorated with images of its purpose, so there could be no mistaking its utility. The overflow, too, was gathered and funneled off out of sight into a drainage system that no doubt ended in the bay. It was very beautiful, bunch of flowers and plants and everything there. And he says that a number of young women, some with small children playing beside them, were taking advantage of the clear and warm afternoon to wash clothing. And Wintrow's just halting and looking.
It also mentions that the women doing the washing have their skirts looped up to their thighs because they're in the water doing washing, which I think is important.
Yes, they were laughing and calling to one another as they worked. Young mothers sat on the basin's edge, washing clothing and keeping a watchful eye on babes and toddlers. Everything was strewn about, it was just a working scene, and Wintrow says there was something so simple yet so profound about the scene that it nearly brought tears to Wintrow's eyes. Not since he had left the monastery had he seen folks so harmoniously engaged in work and life. The sun shone on the water, and the Kamaran women's smooth hair and gleamed on the wet skin of their arms and legs. He gazed avidly, taking it all in as balm that soothed his roughened spirit. But guards find him and say, "Are you lost?" And obviously, they're seeing this 13-year-old kid in ill-fitting sailor's clothing ogling at the women that are just playing in water.
Right, where they have dresses that show their legs, and it's not something that a boy should be watching. It's inappropriate. It looks inappropriate.
Right.
And it's so sad because Wintrow isn't thinking about that at all. It truly, to Wintrow, is about the beauty of Saw coming together, of the humans and nature. It's all about Saw.
Even if he wasn't a sailor, that's still a weird perspective to have, bud.
Yeah.
Like,
Also, yeah. Also, just a weird place to be a stranger in this town, a man watching a bunch of women play in water. It doesn't look good, even if you're not wearing the sailor suit.
so the guards are like, hey, are you lost? The waterfront's down that way. That's where you'll find what you're looking for. He pointed with the truncheon back the way Wintrow had come. What I'm looking for? Wintrow repeated blankly. He looked from one tall man to the other, trying to fathom their hard faces and cold eyes. What had he done to cause offense? I wanted to see the hero's frieze and the carvings on the Adishi Hall. And on the way, the first guard observed with ponderous humor, you thought you might stop off to watch some young women getting wet in a fountain. There seemed nothing he could say. The fountains themselves are objects of beauty, he attempted, and we all know how interested sailors are in objects of beauty. The guard put emphasis on the last three words with heavy sarcasm. Why don't you go buy some objects of beauty down at the Blowing Scarf? Tell them Kentel sent you. Maybe I'll get a commission. And Winch was like, I that's not what I meant, you know? I seriously, I want to take time to see the carvings and everything like that, and I promise there'll be no more trouble. I have to be back on my ship by sundown anyway. I just wanted to look about the town a bit. And the guards are considering for a second. Well, Wintrow thinks they're reconsidering. And he pauses and says, well, we seriously think you ought to get back down to where you belong. Down by the docks is where sailors look about our town. The street for your kind is easy to find. We call it the Sailor's Walk. Plenty there to amuse you, and if you don't head back down that way now, young fellow, I promise you that you will have trouble with us. He could hear his heart beating, a muffled thunder in his ears. He couldn't decide which emotion was stronger, but when he spoke, it was the anger he heard, not the fear. I'm leaving, he said brusquely. But even if the anger was stronger, it was still hard to turn his back on the men as he walked past them. So, the guards are obviously like, you don't belong here. Your kind doesn't belong here. Even if you weren't staring at these women, we would still tell you to go down to the Sailor's Walk and stay there.
Right.
We don't want sailors in our city.
Yeah. It's very much get out of here, you filthy wharf rat. Like,
Yep.
it's, I don't know. And, you know, Wintrow makes a comment after this of they were judging my clothes. They're judging me as a sailor, not who I am. And is trying to kind of, I guess, forgive them in that way of like, of course, they don't know that I'm a good person. They just know what sailors are like. And he can't really blame them because he also knows what sailors are like. So that kind of helps calm him down a little and feel less angry about the situation. But there is this moment of real, I don't know, he had all this fear, and this is now the third instance of something happening that tells him he probably shouldn't be doing this. And yet he continues. He decides that the warning wasn't good enough. This last warning from the guards wasn't good enough. He's going to just go down a side street and try to make his way to where he wants to go anyway.
Yep. But he is bereft of his grandpa's guidance now. He doesn't know really where he's going. And he passes by areas that aren't the main drag, we'll say. A young boy trying to sell him smoking herbs, a woman trying to sell herself to him, and she obviously had some diseases, and trying to refuse them courteously, and eventually saying, any way you like, anything you fancy at all. And then he finally had to speak and say, I have no wish to share your body or your disease, and heard with a pang how cruel his honesty sounded. He would have apologized, but she did not give him time, spitting at him before she turned and flounced away. He continued walking, but found that she had frightened him more than the city guards had. He's kind of wandering around. He doesn't know where he's going. It just adds to, like, there's a pristine outer edge to this town. Everything looks beautiful on the outside, but there are all these little things that kind of add up, like, it's not as nice as you think it is, Wintrow.
Right. And it's not safe to just be wandering alone in this town.
Right, yeah. But he finally gains the heart of the city proper, and everything is paved, and every building fronted on the street had decoration or design. There were obviously public structures of this area. He walked slowly, letting his eyes linger, and stepped back and saw some of the amazing work that he wanted to see. The stone arches were some of the most amazing work he had ever seen. He came to a small temple of Odava, the serpent god, with the traditional rounded doors in the windows of the sect. He had never especially cared for this particular manifestation of Sa, and had never met a follower of Odava who would admit that the serpent deity was but another facet of Sa's jewel face. Nonetheless, the graceful structure still spoke to him of the divine and the many paths folk trod in seeking it out. So finely was the stone of this building worked that when he set hands upon it, he could scarcely feel the seam of the builder's joining. He stood thus for a time, reaching out, as he had been trained to do, to sense structure and stresses in the building. What he discovered was a powerful unity, almost organic in its harmony. I wanted to read that because to me that felt like extending his skill senses
Right.
into something. And this is, again, with all the uses that Wintrow has been utilizing the skill, it is different than what we've seen so far in the book and in the series. And I think different than pretty much anything else we see, except maybe in the flashbacks of the Elderlings.
Right.
So this is just another facet that was lost when the Elderlings kind of went away. Right? It's kind of two halves of the whole combined in the Elderling magic, and this is one part that Sa's priests kept up, and it's kind of that natural beauty, that art, that construction part of it.
Right. Yeah. No, and it is really interesting to have him say that he feels a unity with the piece. I really do wonder what that is supposed to mean. If it's just really well crafted, does this mean that anything well crafted feels that way? Is it like specifically religious buildings because this is a temple? Like
maybe to him because it is, I mean, it's Wintrow.
Right.
It's more in tune with any religious,
I suppose.
building. And also, you know, the followers of Odava definitely don't admit that they're part of Sa, but they are.
Yeah. Okay, Wintrow. It's very fun. It very much feels like if there was a Christian who was like, yeah, basically Buddha is Jesus, but nobody who's a Buddhist would ever admit that. Like, okay.
There are religions that insist that all the gods are
That's
kind
true.
of one deity.
Yeah. No, I do think it's really interesting. It is like a funny thought, though, to think about it like that way. I think in a Western mindset
Right,
that I
yeah.
have, just like, I can't imagine somebody saying that.
I've never met a Buddhist who admitted that Buddha was actually Jesus or like
Yeah.
a prophet for the same God that Jesus
Right.
was, you know?
No, it definitely, but yeah, I could see why people would find that annoying if their religion told them that it isn't. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. He shook his head in amazement, scarcely noticing the group of men in white robes banded with green and gray who had emerged from a door behind him and now walked past and around him with annoyed glances. So he stays there. He has these people walking around him that he doesn't see that are annoyed with him, shooting him glances. And after a time, he's coming to himself, realizing that the sun is going down. The afternoon is more fleeting than he thought it was, and he had no more time to waste. He had to quickly stop a few people to ask directions to Adishi Hall. And he thanks her, moves on, finally makes his way over to that part. But still, more people are looking at him with odd looks. And he suspected that his clothes proclaimed him a stranger to their town. He smiled and nodded, but hastened along, too pressed for time to be more social. So obviously, everyone's like, this kid's out of place.
He's up to something.
Yep. And he gets to Adishi Hall and describes it, and it is gorgeous. It is absolutely a beautiful place. He stood transfixed. It was an image he wished to carry with him forever. People were coming and going from the hall, most dressed in gracefully draped robes in cool tones of blues and greens. It could not have been more lovely if it had been contrived spectacle. He softened the focus of his eyes and took several deep breaths, preparing to absorb the scene before him with complete concentration. So that also seems like a specific technique or something that is kind of captured and like almost like preparing himself for photographic memory.
Right. It does feel like a skill thing too, just in that you're relaxing your body
Yeah.
and losing focus on your eyes and just like getting ready to open yourself up. I don't know. It's like very clear that there's something skill related to what Wintrow does, especially because before, where he was opening himself up to feel the attunement of this Odava
Temple building.
temple. Yeah, like he realized with the priest coming out that he hadn't realized how much time had passed, which
Right.
we know is something that happens with the skill users. It feels like no time has passed at all, but it's been
Probably
a lot of time.
standing, touching that building for an hour, you know?
Which also, imagine you're just a person walking down your street, the same one you've walked every day, and all of a sudden you turn to the right and there's just some kid in sailor's clothes, like holding onto a wall, staring out into nothing. Like that would be really weird.
Yeah, Wintrow's a weirdie.
Yeah, just a little bit. But a cute weirdie. He's our weirdie.
So he prepares to take in this scene, but a heavy hand falls on his shoulder and says, "Sailor boy is lost again." And he gets shoved down by the guards onto the sprawling paving stones. And the older guard looked down at him and shook his head almost regretfully. "I guess we'll have to see him back to where he belongs this time," he observed, as the brawny guard advanced on Wintrow. There was a deadly softness to his words that chilled Wintrow's heart. Even more chilling were the three people who had halted to watch. None of them spoke nor made any effort to interfere. When he looked appealingly at them, seeking help, their eyes were guiltless, showing only their interest in what would happen next. Wintrow, of course, is saying, "I've done no harm. I simply wanted to see Adishi Hall. My grandfather saw it, and we don't welcome waterfront rats coming up our streets and dawdling about staring at folk. Here in Cress, we don't let trouble start." So the older man is speaking, but the younger guard is the one who is throwing him around.
Like literally throwing him.
Yep, picking him, throwing him into walls, pushing him into walls, pushing him down, moving him down this street away from everything. Wintrow is kind of trying to tuck into a roll, falling and trying to maintain some momentum so he doesn't get as hurt. Even so, one paving stone caught him in the short ribs as he did, but at least no bones broke. He's just getting bruised and battered. But again, the guard seizes Wintrow, shook him, and then threw him the general direction of the waterfront. This time he collides with the corner of a building, and the shock is keeping him from getting to his feet very fast. He's getting skinned up, and he starts running away. And the guard, of course, is having fun and just pursuing him.
Right. The young guard is having fun pursuing him, and the older guard is still talking. He's kind of lecturing loudly, and Wintrow realizes that it's kind of almost as a shield of like, nothing to see here.
Yep.
I'm doing my job because he was causing trouble, and kind of reassuring people that they don't need to help because this is right.
Yeah, we've nothing against sailors so long as they keep themselves and their vermin to the waterfront where they belong. We tried to be nice to you, boy, just because you're such a pup. If you'd gone to Sailor's Walk, you'd have found it suited you well, I'm sure. Now you're bound for the waterfront anyway. You could have saved all of us a lot of effort and yourself a lot of bruises if you'd only listened. And it's calm reasonableness coming from him in that whole speech.
Right. And that's kind of what makes it scary. And I will say, I think it's human nature to be wary of someone who is going against the status quo. So Wintrow staring at people, that's not like polite, right? That's not something that people typically do, is just innocently stare at others. It's probably very off-putting, especially if you're not expecting it. And so I especially think that there's this moment of like, there's some sort of justification on the guard side of like, well, he's weird and he's doing something weird and that's wrong. And we need to protect our city and we're going to have fun doing it by hurting this little kid, which is horrible and not the way people should act. But I think it is a really human thing that a lot of times when you aren't used to somebody's customs, or even if it's not a custom, just people who don't know the social cues that are kind of invisible that others just seem to inherently know, it's hard for people not to like pick up on that and then either make fun of it or just point it out as some like as a way, an excuse to be mean.
Right.
And that's what we have here, is just this, oh, well, you're not where you're supposed to be and you're staring at all our people. And Wintrow is just trying to not get hurt too badly.
Yeah, even protesting Not a sailor. I'm a priest of Sa. The young guard laughed, and the older man shook his head in mock regret for the boy. Oh, that makes you a heretic as well as waterfront scum. Haven't you heard that the followers of Odava have no use for those who would submerge him as but a part of their own god? I was about to tell Flav that you'd had enough, but another knock or two might hasten your enlightenment. And by the way, Flav is the other guard's name, but it's spelled like Flav, like Flava Flav. And I had a hard time in my head not going like Flav.
I didn't even notice. I was just like, Flav, okay. That's a name now.
But he is grabbed by the collar, and Wintrow shrugs out of the oversized shirt and runs away, and everyone's laughing at him. But he runs away all the way down to the waterfront, and he finds himself eventually into an area that he can only assume is the Sailor's Walk. There's tattoo shops, a cheap chandlery, tavern, another tavern, etc. You know, he finally fear sprints his way through the city down to the waterfront.
Right. And when he finally gets there, he's able to stop and take stock of what has happened to see what kind of injury may have been left to him. It turns out that he is a little scraped up and his face is starting to puff up a little bit from where he hit the building. And it kind of makes him scared for a moment of how far were those guards willing to go? Like,
Right.
what
If I hadn't run,
how far would they have beat me up?
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary to think about. It would be, especially coming right out of that situation.
Yeah. And he thinks of hearing about sailors who had been, quote, roughed up by the city guard, even in Bingtown. Was this what was meant by that? He had always assumed that it happened only to those who were drunk or ill-mannered or in some way offensive. Yet today it had happened to him. Why? Because I was dressed as a sailor, he said quietly to himself. For one ghastly instant, he considered that this might be punishment from Sa for not having worn his priest's robe. He had denied Sa, and as retribution, Sa had denied him his protection. He pushed that unworthy thought away. So children and the superstitious spoke of Sa as if he were nothing but a much larger and more vengeful human rather than the god of all. No, and he thinks about it like, what was the lesson then? And he's meditating a bit, the breath is coming more easily to his lungs, and eventually he's thinking, what should be carried away from this? What is there to be learned? And the thought comes to him, and with great clarity, he sees his own gullibility. He had seen the beauty of the city and interpreted it to mean that folk of beautiful spirit lived there. He had come here expecting to be greeted and welcomed in the light of Sa. So strong had been his prejudgment that he had failed to heed any of the warnings that now glared so plainly. His crewmates had warned him, the city guard's hostility had been a warning, the baleful glances from the townspeople. He had been like an overly friendly child approaching a growling dog. It was his own fault he'd been bitten. And then a wave of desolation sweeps over him, and he becomes sunk in that. It was hopeless. It was all hopeless. He'd never regained his monastery, never returned to the life of meditation. All of this huge depressive thought spiral comes to him. And suddenly he felt young and stupid, gullible in the worst way. A fool, a stupid fool. The pain of this hurt was as real as his bruises. His heart actually felt heavy in his chest. He squeezed his eyes shut to it, wishing he could be somewhere else, be someone else who didn't feel this way.
Right. So I think what's so hard about this for Wintrow is, so this horrible thing happened and he uses the techniques that the priest gave him of, looking at the bigger picture. Let's not get upset. Let's think about what are the good outcomes of this? And that's like what lessons that you could have learned. And in that, Wintrow realizes, his gullibility, which I think does stem from the fact that he is a child and has never probably had to be on his own in a place that is scary like that. This is probably his first time truly alone in a city. Before, I'm sure he always had priests with him. It wasn't alone. And we also saw at the beginning, he talked about how if he wore a priest's robe, people would welcome him with open arms. He didn't expect people like the guard to be vehemently against Sa. That just didn't even cross his mind as a possibility. So I think him realizing the situation he's in and just the reality of things, and knowing that while the exercise that he learned from the monastery helped, it just brings back the fact that he isn't there anymore. That it doesn't matter the reflection he's done, because he doesn't get to go back to the monastery and continue praying to Saw.
Right.
He mentions that the worst part of everything is that he has to go back to the ship afterwards.
But where else could he go? Stay in the streets of Cress? No. So he picks himself up and eventually wanders his way down to where he thinks Comfrey was describing, the Sailor's Walk, sees some other sailors down there, walks past stalls of, cheap charms that probably don't do anything, but everyone is advertising and pities people who buy them. And eventually sees a animal trainer, a beast trainer, offering the chance to wrestle his bear for some coin.
Right. Well, I guess technically first he meets up with his crew.
Well, he sees them first. He sees the beast tamer, and his small eyes prowled on the crowd. And Wintrow wondered what sort of idiot would be talked into accepting such a challenge. And then with a sinking heart, he recognizes Comfrey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got lost in a section that I had underlined.
Oh, yeah.
So as he's walking through, there's a group of
other sailors.
Yes, of other sailors who come out of a bar, and they all wore headscarves that once had been white with a black bird marked on the front. And I specifically marked this down because is that not Kennet's flag?
I was thinking that too, but I didn't go look and check.
Yeah, because Kennet's flag is the bird that he mentions.
It's a raven, yeah.
Yeah.
Or is it a crow? Can't remember.
Well,
one of the two.
They're very similar looking
Blackbird,
birds.
yeah. But I don't know what background it's on. So this obviously is not Kennet himself.
No, but I was wondering if maybe this is a recently freed slaves that Kennet has been training as pirates.
Wait, where were they wearing these scarves? Were they head scarves? So it might be covering slave tattoos if they're on their foreheads.
Yeah.
But a lot of slave tattoos are on cheeks. So
right.
But I think Sorkor's is on his forehead, and it's burned or something. So it could be the recently freed crews that Kennet has.
I don't know. I just found that really interesting. I don't think it's Kennet, because I think if Kennet was docked with a live ship, there would be some comment made about it. We would know that
100%.
had happened. And I also don't see Kennet coming to this area anyway.
No, next chapter he's sailing into Divvy Town.
Right. So maybe not. Whatever. But I did think it was really interesting that I'm pretty sure that this is his symbol, and time has passed since he freed this first group of slaves.
Yes.
So this really could be
in the next one. Actually, it says that he has 4 other ships now.
Yeah. So it could be. Oh, it could just be people who support his general life choices. Who knows? But I just found that a really interesting detail. And these people interact with Wintrow, and because he's all scuffed up and he doesn't have a shirt, they make a joke that the woman didn't want him or something.
And took a shirt too or something.
Yeah.
But the one reason I think that, or at least that's leaning me away from one of Kennet's crew, is because they're pirates. Why would they brush up and be in a ship on a dock in a respectable island, right?
Well, hear me out. This is near Chalced, and Kennet trades with Chalcedean merchants with stolen goods, right?
I don't think it's near Chalced. I think they've sailed, because Chalced is north from Bingtown. They went to Chalced first, and then they sailed back down towards Jamalia.
Why would they do that?
Because I don't know. That's what the thing is, though. That's what their plan was. They had to sell their other things, right?
Right, but why would you go up to Chalced and then turn around, go right past Bingtown again to go up? Is that where?
Jamalia is south from Bingtown. Chalced is north, because it's north to south. It's 6 duchies, Chalced, Kershore and Bingtown, and then Jamalia is south of that. From my understanding, from my head memory, my head map.
Jamalia's on the other side of the Pirate Isles. So does that mean that you have to go from Bingtown down past the Pirate Isles to Jamalia?
Yes, that's why the Pirate Isles are very lucrative, because all of the merchant ships from Jamalia and the slave ships from Jamalia to Chalced are all going to be going through the Pirate Isles. That's like that main channel there. That's why it's the most important thing to kind of to control.
Chalced is not marked on the map on the front of the book, so I can't tell where Chalced is.
I'm probably 95% positive it is north of there.
Mm. Okay. That just seems like a weird choice to me personally to go that route, but
they had those cargoes, right, that they needed to sell yet, that Althea was
it was the nuts, the comfrey nuts or whatever.
The comfrey nuts, yeah.
But they would have sold it all in one go, right? They wouldn't go to multiple ports to sell?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But either way, I know I don't think they're as close to Chalced anymore.
Right.
Which is to say that the crew of recently freed sailors could be taking their freedom and being like, we're not going to pirate yet. We're going to sail around like we're merchants and take some, eye up some people or whatever.
Right.
So that definitely could be. Plus, if it is, headscarves with the black bird, it's kind of all kind of fitting into place. But
yeah. Well, what's the name of the place that they stopped at?
Cress, which is like Claw Island, I think.
Oh, okay. So they're like literally in the Pirate Isles right now. So I don't know how respectable.
Okay. Yeah, if they're in one of the islands there.
Yeah. They're like in the
south of Bingtown, right?
South of, it's really hard to tell. This map is really bad. No offense to Robin Hobb, who created it. Also, I'm really bad at reading maps, so. They're almost halfway to Jamalia, which is funny because it's the 4th of 7 stops.
I remember they were going to pick up some things as well, like other cargo besides slaves in Jamalia. So,
well, no, I thought it was all slaves. It's just different types of slaves.
Excuse me. He pretty much Kenneth.
Basically.
Kyle did say that they'll have some non-perishables as well, just in case something goes bad. But that could have just been him saying it.
Right.
It was to Ronica and Kefria, I believe.
Okay. Well, either way. So I think it's like the right area. It's close to the Pirate Isles, so.
Yeah. But I would assume that he is making more trades, like buying some stuff in Chalced. If he has to sell the nuts, sell it over here.
Right. Trying to make
as much money as possible. So, and Althea did mention that there was multiple things bought and sold at different stops, and I'm sure that's just how trader runs work.
Yeah, definitely. But anyway, so I think it's fair to say that this definitely could be a Kennet crew.
Especially if it is in the Pirate Isles or like right by them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's essentially right there. So it's in the right area. It's definitely a Kennet crew. And this is Wintrow's first brush with the crew.
Yeah. So he does find Comfrey looking and talking to the beast tamer with the bear, the trained bear. And he was tempted to walk on by and look for Mild, and then he recognized Mild amongst those placing bets. With a sigh, he went to join them. Mild recognized him with a grin of delight as he approached. Hey, come on, you're in luck. Comfrey's going to wrestle the bear. Put your money down and you can double it. He leaned closer to Wintrow. It's a sure thing. We just saw a man win. All he had to do was get up on the bear's back, and the bear gave up right away. The Beastmaster didn't want to let anyone wrestle him after that, but Comfrey insisted. And then Mild, after a little bit, says, oh, hey, what happened to your shirt? And Wintrow says, I lost it wrestling with the city guards, trying to make a joke about it. And he was a bit hurt at how easily Mild accepted his words until he noticed the tang of the other boy's breath. A moment later, he saw him shift something about in his lower lip. Sinden. The focus of his eyes quivered with the stimulant. Wintrow felt uneasy for him. The drug was forbidden aboard ship. If he even came aboard still intoxicated, he'd be in trouble. The rash optimism it gave a man did not make him a prudent sailor. Wintrow thought he should say something, suggest caution to him somehow, but could find no words. I just wanted to let you know that I'll be waiting for you back at the boat. I've finished my sightseeing and I'm headed there now. And Mild convinces him to stay, saying, "Oh, the bear's tired. He's already wrestled half a dozen times." And Wintrow's like, "Oh, and the last man won." And Miles like, yeah, just put money down. It's easy money.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a bear, so no, it's not.
Right. So Wintrow sees that this is probably a trick, that there is no way that one person can beat a bear that easily. And it's a little suspicious that the bear had never lost. And then the one time it did, he had now suddenly the guy's convinced to let his bear fight one more time. It's not great. And and poor Wintrow is just kind of like, well, I guess I'm here.
Yeah.
And then we have Mild, who is indulging in Sinden, which is horrible and probably encouraged by this new crew. And it makes me
I think he's the only one that has it, though.
That we know of.
Of the group that he mentions, which is just him, Mild, and Comfrey.
Right. But we don't know if the other crew has it or not. But
it's a sailor's walk. I'm sure there's tons of it.
Right. But so it's like really frustrating because we know like Efren Vestrit had a no tolerance policy. And I think that's what Wintrow is referring to, that like you're not supposed to have it aboard.
Kyle too.
I guess we've never heard Kyle specifically say no drugs.
Wintrow doesn't really know about Efren's rules unless it would be through Vivacia. So
right.
I think he's talking specifically about Kyle's rules because he says if Mild even went back on slightly intoxicated, he'd be in trouble.
Well, I was wondering if maybe that came because he has been sharing memories with Vivacia, and so that knowledge is just there.
Could be, but I felt like this is more of like Wintrow is present and this is what the rules are and everyone kind of knows them sort of thing. That's what it felt to me like. It didn't feel like an intrusive thought in any way.
Well, it doesn't have to be intrusive, right? Like if that's just something he learned through osmosis, then that'd be why.
Yeah, just in the rest of the chapter when he's talking about Efren Vestrit's memories and things, he specifically identifies that and can tell when it's using his grandfather's memories to find the way, and then it's like, oh, now I don't have them. Now I have to do this. So it feels like, I don't know, to me in the chapter, it feels like Wintrow can differentiate between the two.
Okay. I mean, I would argue that the reason that he can sense that is because in that moment he's going to a city he's never gone to before and he knows the direction and he's recognizing strangers, whereas this is just a rule for a ship in a split moment. This isn't like actively seeking out. So do you
think Kyle definitely has a lenient policy towards drugs?
I think a lot more of Kyle's sailors do drugs than Efren Vestrit's.
What are you basing that off of?
Off of the ships, the old ships boy, first chance he gets, taking drugs.
Hey, that was from Efren Vestrit's crew.
Yeah, but he also is now hanging out with all the adults, and they're I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it is a rule. Just everybody has that rule.
Kyle is a druggie, and he is the gateway to.
I don't think he's a druggie. I just don't think he'd be like smart enough to like talk about it. Be like, hey, don't be under the influence on my boat, and like check. You know what I mean? Like Efren Vestrit feels like the kind of guy who like sniffs the breath of all of his sailors when they come back on board to be like, "Did you do Sinden? I can smell it." And I feel like Kyle's like you guys seem just mostly drunk. I'm going to take it at that. You know what I mean? That's the vibes I get.
Oh, so Kyle's the cool boss, huh?
No.
Either way, Mild is on Sinden and he's kind of has that reckless abandon and optimism and confidence right now.
And he convinces Wintrow to stay to watch the fight.
And of course, Comfrey, within seconds, loses because it's a bear and this is a scam. And he's thrown to the ground and he can't really stand up. He's slow to get up and everyone's like booing because everyone bet money on Comfrey. And it looks like he has cracked ribs. And the beast tamer is shouting, "Do you give then?" And Comfrey's nodding his head violently, unable to get enough wind to speak. And the bear listens to the beast tamer, and everyone was very mad at Comfrey because everyone is obviously like, oh, the last guy just won. Easy peasy money, and put all their money down.
Right. It specifically said that Comfrey goes to get on the bear's back, and the bear acts as though it had been trained a million times and swats him away. Like it knew the thing was coming. And it's not like a lucky guess. It was a very trained movement, according to Wintrow's eyes. It's also said before that Mild is trying to get Wintrow to bet because Mild has bet the last of his coins. And Wintrow has to say, hey, I actually don't have any money, so I can't. And that's how he gets out of that. But Comfrey does lose. And again, there's probably a lot of people who bet the last of their coins because they thought it was so sure. So people are upset. And, you know, Wintrow's like, hey, let's go get him. And nobody really wants to help him up. So Wintrow, being the good-natured person he is, decides to help.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Torg is in the crowd as well, that Wintrow notices, shouting out, Comfrey, you dumbass, can't even get past a hobbled bear because the bear has like some shackles on its hind feet, which animal cruelty much, you know?
Right. Well, Wintrow does mention that the bear is moving kind of slowly.
Yeah. And so everyone is commiserating amongst themselves about all the money that they lost. And like you said, Wintrow goes to kind of help Wintrow up, or help Comfrey up a little bit, and all the other sailors, because it's not just Vivacia sailors, are kind of muttering because Comfrey from the Vivacia lost them all their money. So he says to Wintrow, I nearly had him. Damn near had him. Lost everything I'd won earlier. Well, I'm broke now. Damn, if I had just been a bit faster. He coughed again and then belched beerily. I nearly won. I don't think so, Wintrow said quietly, more to himself than to Comfrey, but the man heard him. No, really, I almost had him, lad. If I'd been a bit smaller, a bit quicker, we'd all have been gone back to the ship with fat pockets. I don't think so, Wintrow rejoined. To comfort him, he added, I think it was rigged. I think the man that won was in league with the bear man. And he says the whole scam, like, he was trained, he was there just to show that, yeah, you can win. And then the man goes off and everybody else is going to lose, betting all their money. And Comfrey is like, it's not to, Wintrow's trying to comfort Comfrey here.
Right.
And Comfrey's like, hey, that was a scam.
Yeah.
You cheated.
Everybody's like, hey, wait a minute. Like, it's really hard because clearly Wintrow's a little bit more intelligent than the men.
Or a little less intoxicated.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he is kind of just pointing out the obvious. To be fair, if you're not expecting a scam and you're just watching a bear fight, it would be really fun to see a man best a bear. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure you get caught up in the, oh my gosh, it is possible. And then you're not even thinking, you're just putting your money down.
Right. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, that was a really horrible idea. It's easy to see how they got swept away in the moment. And now sober Wintrow is here to explain what happened. And instead of leaving it alone, like, oh, lesson learned, they've decided it's cheating and they need to try again.
Right.
Which I think comes back to the, maybe they're not as smart as Wintrow, because if it was cheating the first time, there is no way to win. Like, there's not, it doesn't magically become less cheating because you pointed out that he cheated. Like, you're still not going to be able to win.
And the beast tamer is like fighting back against all these accusations. Like, of course it wasn't rigged, you know? How could it be rigged? You saw the man, you saw the bear. There were only two in the square. He paid for a chance to wrestle the bear and he lost. It doesn't get any simpler than that. In a sense, what the man said was true, and Wintrow expected the sailors to grudgingly agree with it. He had not taken into account how much they had drunk, nor how much money they had lost. Once the accusation of cheating had been raised, a simple denial was not going to calm them. One, more quick-witted than the others, suddenly said, Hey, where did that fellow go, the one who won earlier? Is he your friend? Does the bear know him? So they're all riling each other up, and someone else in the crowd says, Well, I think the bear's been trained for this, someone declared angrily. It seemed to Wintrow that the most obvious, and in this context, the stupidest statement that he'd heard yet.
Like, yeah, obviously the bear has been trained
to wrestle other men.
Yeah, it's so stupid.
So everyone is super mad. He's kind of rustling up a riot with just those few words to Comfrey. And Torg is here also kind of leading the charge, saying, hey, we said we want our money back. Torg pointed out to the beast tamer. Comfrey's my shipmate. You think we're going to stand by and see him beat up and us cheated out our hard-earned money? You made our man look bad, and by sawsballs, we don't stand still for that. Like many a bully, he knew how to best rally men to their own self-interest. He glanced around at the men watching him and then turned back to the beast tamer. He nodded significantly. Think we can't just take it if you choose not to give it? There was a rumbling of agreement from the others. And the beast tamer knew he was outnumbered, and he was looking for a compromise, and says, I didn't cheat, my bear didn't cheat. I think most of you know that, but I can be fair. If any one of you wants, I'll let him wrestle the bear for free. If he wins, I pay off all the bets, same as if that man had won. If he loses, I keep the money. Fair enough, I'm giving you a chance to win back your money for free. And everyone is like, yeah, that seems fair. That seems fair.
Literally just got done explaining how the bear is trained and this was a scam from the get-go. And now also they're like, oh, no, actually, you know what? If we get one more chance to fight, I bet it will go differently this time.
And Comfrey is like, all right, when you go against him, you're little and quick. All you got to do is get past him and onto his back. No, thank you. As quickly as Comfrey had pushed him forward, Wintrow stepped back. But the sailor's words had been overheard, and another man from another ship took it up. Yeah, let their ship's boy give it a try. He's little and quick. I bet he can get past the bear and get our money back for us. Wintrow is trying to yell out, no, I'm not doing it. Torg swaggering up, saying, so you think you can win our money back for us? Somehow I doubt it, but give it a try. And yells to the guy, our ship's boy wants to give it a try. Like they're all just drunkenly saying, yeah, Wintrow said he wanted to do it. He's going to do this. And the whole time Wintrow's like, no, I'm not wrestling a bear.
And it's so hard because in this moment, people are taking it like, oh, you're too scared. Like they literally just forgot the fact that this is rigged.
Yeah.
That there's no way he's going to win. He's just going to get hurt. And they don't care. And it's like, oh, you're scared to get hurt? Like, yeah, I don't want to be attacked by a bear. Do you? What? In what world? And none of them are taking that into consideration. They're all just like, ooh, look at the wimpy little ship's boy from Vivacia. What a bunch of cowards.
And now Torg is getting embarrassed because Wintrow is saying out loud he's not going to do it. And other sailors are like, he's got no guts. So Torg's like, well, he's insulting all of us and making all of us look bad. And he's turning to Wintrow saying, you have to do this. You're shaming your ship. Get in there and get our money back for us. Wintrow shook his head. I'm not stupid enough to take on a bear. You want it done? You do it. Even if I got past him, got on his back, there's no guarantee he'll give in. Just because he did it before, he's not going to do it again. He's trained.
Right. Wintrow's trying to use logic in this moment. And honestly, fair. You know what, Torg, if you want it to happen, you do it.
Yeah. But Mild has had Sinden, and he volunteers. I will do it. And Wintrow, again, is like, no. Don't do it, Mild. It's stupid. If you weren't humming on Sinden, you'd know that. If Torg wants it done, let Torg do it. And Torg is like, I'm too drunk to do it. I can't. I've been drinking too much. You do it, Wintrow. Show us you got some guts. Prove you're a man. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. He takes his stand. The thing that I was talking about before where he has that platitude from Saw, like sometimes a man has to separate himself from the group. Right. That's what he's doing, which is an incredibly smart decision right here. It just loses him the crew or any chance he had to be accepted.
Right. Which is horrible. Like the fact that they can't understand that this isn't worth it. You guys made a dumb decision and it's still rigged. It is.
Who wants to wrestle a bear?
Also that, like, have you seen bears? Like, they're huge. I've seen a bear in real life more than once, and they are really big and scary.
Even a black bear, like that's maybe my height, 6.5 feet tall or something, maybe even a little bit taller than me, on its hind legs. That thing will outweigh me by 3 times and be 4 times as strong as me. There's no way I'm getting on its back
Yeah,
without it killing me.
it's just, they're scary even when they're not angry.
Yeah.
They're so big. And like as cute and floofy as they are, I love their little ears. So cute. Don't want to fight them. That's dumb. That is like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And yet here Torg is like, well, I can't do it. I'm drunk. You have to. The whole like toxic culture of sailors where you have to prove yourself and you have to do dumb stuff and hurt yourself on purpose, knowing it's bad, or else you're not a real man, is just horrible. And poor Wintrow is just doing what's right. And poor Mild is mistakenly trying to fix the problem by putting himself in a lot of danger.
Yeah, and Wintrow is still trying to get Mild to not do it. And people are making unflattering remarks about the Vivacious crew and everything like that. And Wintrow's still kind of saying, hey, Mild, don't do this. And Torg gives him a savage shake saying, shut up. He belched. Shut up, he repeated more clearly. Mild ain't afraid. He can do it if he wants. Or do you want to do it? Hurry up, decide. One of you has got to win our money back. We're nearly out of time. Because the Beast Tamer's like, oh, he's not going to do it? I'll take all your money then. So Wintrow's remarking, like, why did it come down to this between Mild and me getting into a square with a bear to win back someone else's money in a rigged game? It was preposterous. And no one else was on his side. So Mild just jumps in. He says, me. He jumps in and it kind of does that flash forward thing that Robin Hobb does and says later Wintrow wondered if the Beast Tamer was aggravating the bear the whole time because the bear didn't lumber toward Mild nor mince forward on its hobbled legs. Instead, he lunged on all fours for the boy, slamming his huge head against him and then gripping him with his huge paws. The bear reared up with Mild yelling and struggling in his grasp. Blunted or not, his claws shredded the young sailor's shirt until a shout from his owner made him throw the boy aside. Mild landed hard outside the bear's square. Get up, someone yelled, but Mild did not. Even the bear's owner looked rattled at the violence of it. He grabbed the chain, tugged hard on to convince the animal he had control of it. It's over, he declared. You saw it all. It was fair. The bear won. Boy's out of bounds. Money is mine. Some grumbles, but no one challenged him as he trudged off. And people are still upset at Vivacious crew, saying gutless, a lot of them. And Mild is extremely, extremely injured here. His mouth was half open. He was drawing in dust with every breath. He had landed so hard, chest first, it would be a miracle if his ribs were not at least cracked. We've got to get him back to the ship, he said, and glanced up at Comfrey. Comfrey looked down at him with disgust. Then he looked away as if he were not there. Come on, boys. Time to get back to the ship. Heedless of any injuries Mild might have had, he seized the lad by his arm and dragged him upright. When Mild sagged like a rag doll, he scooped up the boy and flung him over his shoulder. The 2 other sailors from the Vivacious crew trailed after him. None of them deigned to notice Wintrow's existence. It wasn't my fault, Wintrow declared aloud, but somehow he wondered if it was. Was so, Torg pointed out. You knew he was full of Sinden. You shouldn't have been in there, but he had to go because you were too much of the coward. Well, Torg grinned with satisfaction. Now they all know you for what you are, boy. Before it was just me that knew you were a water-ass coward you were. He spat and walked away, and Wintrow was just left sitting there in that square. He knew he had done the right thing and made the right choices, but a terrible sense of lost chance was welling up in him. He suspected he had just lost his opportunity to be accepted as part of the Vivacious crew, to be considered a man among men. He glanced up at the westering sun and then hastened to catch up with the men who now despised him. So that's his chance, but it was the right decision. There was no good decision there either way. Everyone is drunk and on drugs, egging each other on, trying to win back money that they lost because they're betting on a stupid rigged game that none of them could see was rigged.
Right.
And then someone had the audacity to say, I think this bear's trained.
What? Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think the worst part to me is that they all, for one split moment, were like, yeah, wait a second. This bear is trained. This is rigged. And then a second later, like, fight him. It's more fair that way. And like, it makes.
You just got to be smaller.
Yeah. And like, somehow it's Vivacia's crew's fault for not going in. Like, why don't they do it then? If it's so, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
why is it on Vivacia's crew? Like, I get that Vivacia's crew lost last, but like, why does that crew have to be the one to fix it? You guys are the ones who lost money. You do it.
Drunken mob latching on to an idea.
I
Wintrow
guess.
was volunteered, and everyone's like, yeah, they got to fix it. Try the ship's boy.
And then nobody else. It's just so stupid. The whole thing is bad. And poor Mild. I just like Mild let the peer pressure win. He decided to go, and Mild could have just not volunteered, honestly.
Yeah, he could not have. But also, I don't even think it's the peer pressure or like trying to, I think it's the Sinden that was just like, I can definitely do this. Everyone's saying you got to be smaller and quicker. I'm that. I can do that.
I don't know. I feel like it's also peer pressure because he's hearing people disparage the Vivacia.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's the pressure.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I don't want them to talk bad about my ship, and Wintrow's not doing it, so I'll do it.
Yeah.
And
that's fair.
probably also came from a spot of trying to help Wintrow out.
Mm-hmm.
And it massively backfired. It's not good.
No. Now he is despised, pretty much.
Right.
And that's where we leave Wintrow off on the very bad, no good day.
Yeah, it's horrible. I just feel really bad for him. I hate that that's where we leave it. I hate that everyone has now turned on him when it's their fault. Like, he didn't make them put all their money in the ring. He didn't make them fight. He just told them it was rigged, and they believed him long enough to demand a retrial. Like, I don't know. He tried. But I do also want to take a moment to talk about the bear, because we've talked about the bear previously in earlier episodes for this book about whether or not this bear would tell us if Wintrow is witted or not.
I do not think he is.
I do not think he is either. He doesn't
kind of solidifies it, actually.
Yeah, he doesn't ever talk about what the bear is feeling. He doesn't really talk about.
He doesn't even talk about like the attitude of the bear, really.
Or emotions. I mean, there's like lumbering is used, but that's just a general description. That's not, like an emotion. I mean, obviously he thinks later that the bear is agitated because it goes on all fours and really attacks. But I don't think that that's because he can sense the agitation. That's just because it's moving faster. That's just like...
Right. I think it's pretty much confirmed he's not now.
Yeah. But I do think that the man who had the bear was witted.
You do?
I do. Because I think the bear was angry because it could sense the fear of its owner, of the people turning, and like, it was like a defense thing. Because why else would it be upset? I just don't think.
I don't think that. Well, I guess it's possible, but I personally don't think a member of the Old Blood would hobble their own animal, even to like make money like that, because it wouldn't be it's not an even partnership then, right? Because money isn't something that the bear needs or wants.
Money gets the bear a house and food, potentially.
I guess it's just, I really don't think, I just don't think it would be chained up and have the hobble on the back legs. And I just think it would just be it's a little bit too much and a little bit too cruel for a witted person who's sharing the emotions.
Well, if the hobble is loose and always taken off whenever they're not around people.
Sure, there definitely could be, he definitely could be witted, definitely could have accommodations and come to an agreement with the partner and, make that arrangement with them and do the scam together. Definitely possible. I think it's probable? Personally, no, I don't think he is.
Well, I think, just to rebut you, I think you're thinking about it as Old Blood, and that's one culture's version of sharing blood with animals.
True, definitely.
This. And I don't think that would be what this is, because that's not the same culture. So potentially there isn't that like one with nature hippie feel to this group's version.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I just think it's hard to do it's hard to get away from that because you are sharing emotions and minds, like we talked about before with Wintrow and Vivacia's bond. It's deeper than just a friendship, right? It's an
Right.
intimacy, and like I said, they could have come to that agreement, and they could be like, "Hey, let's do a scam together, so I can get money, and we can be more comfortable as partners, as wit partners."
I mean,
But I don't think it's a one-way thing. I don't see any way that.
well, hear me out then about this also. We don't know that this guy does this all the time. We
That's
don't
fair.
know. He could just be trying to get fair to get them on a boat somewhere else.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Like I said,
Yeah.
any sort of arrangement could have been made. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I just don't see even Night Eyes going along with that. Night Eyes doesn't even want to be a dog, like, and Night Eyes and Fitz have one of the closest relationships.
But that's also the type of animal Night Eyes is, right? Like,
I guess.
if you think
But
about
bears
like,
are even more like, I don't care who you are. Get like, because
I
we met
mean,
one with Black Rolf, right?
right, but like, was she like, I don't care who you are? I mean, I feel like bears in general have the kind of reputation of being protectors and like willing to go. I don't know. It just like, I guess dogs are supposed to be loyal,
Right.
but I feel like a mama bear would do anything for its cubs. And if that's like sort of the relationship vibe with their share partner, like
Yeah.
do anything to keep you safe. I don't know.
It's not my headcanon, but technically somebody could write fanfic of just those two as like the main characters,
Right.
having like a little scene before they got off on a boat on the main island or the mainland somewhere off on their adventures. Just not my headcanon, I guess.
Okay. But yeah,
Just like you don't think it's a real dragon on the Barrens.
well, fair enough. But either way, that concludes the chapter.
Yeah.
A very long 50-page chapter.
Yeah.
53 pages
This
on
is going to
mine.
be another 2-hour plus episode, I think. We'll see how much it edits down, but we're definitely, I think, over 2 hours right now. So, oof.
It won't get easier.
Yeah,
These chapters are long for this series.
that's true.
Maybe
That's true.
second book will be better. Probably not. It's just a lot of perspectives to get in.
Yeah, I'll have to look at like the number of chapters because the book lengths are very similar, but the number of chapters compared to the first books, I'm not sure. Kind of wondering if they shorten up later. I think next chapter is a bit shorter, at least. So
There are 36 chapters in this one.
I think there's like 32 in the other ones, right? There's 36 in this one. So the chapters must shorten up then, eventually. They have to, right? Please, they have to. I guess the length could be longer for these ones, but I think they're about the same. So
Yeah, I don't know how many pages are in the other one, but there's 800 something in this. I think there's less.
well, next chapter should be a shorter one, I think. So we'll get back with Kenneth on there. He's going back to Divvy Town. So if you have anything, any thoughts about Wintrow, his relationship with the skill, with Saw, his kind of split divide, his morality divide here, the stupidity of the crew, anything with Althea and what she is going through and her, her mindset and thinking of nothing and trying to think of nothing and get through the tasks, please let us know.
Right.
You can reach us at isfitshappy@gmail.com, or you can message us on isfitshappy at Facebook, Instagram, and we are still on Twitter as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
As long as it exists.
so thanks so much for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.